Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, and today we are doing a follow-up video to this video about Nigel Farage losing his rights to a bank account at Coutts for unknown reasons or for reported reasons from the BBC and Financial Times, saying that Farage did not meet the minimal financial threshold despite getting no warnings, and direct letters from the bank not explaining why he lost his account. So, after about a week of waiting around and this story making it to the back end of newspapers, Farage has come out with an absolute blinder. He managed to get his hand on the document from Coutts about exactly why they decided to debank him. And this is his initial reaction on Twitter.
So I put in what's called a subject access request to Coutts, the bank, who decided they wanted to close me out. I wanted to find out why. What was the reasoning behind them closing the account? Now, as you know, they had briefed the BBC that it was to do with lack of funds and nothing else. Well, here's the document. It is an incredible 40 pages.
So already I feel very vindicated, because throughout the last video, I was throwing complete doubt over this story that the BBC were pushing about Nigel Farage not having enough money to have a Coutts account, despite literally everyone else who has a Coutts account saying, well, they've gone under that threshold and never been threatened with their account closure. And now there is a 40-page document about why Farage was kicked out of Coutts. You don't make a 40-page dossier about someone if the only reason you kicked them out was because of a lack of funds. Clearly there was something else going on here.
It reads rather like a brief that you'd give to a barrister ahead of a serious criminal trial. I mean, from the tone of this document, I must be one of the worst human beings ever to have inhabited this planet. But I guess if you were, upper middle class, wealthy, London, metropolitan elite, then that's perhaps how you would view me. Although quite what this has to do with banking and commerce, I don't really know.
Well, quite, because as we went through last video, the other reason Nigel Farage thought that he had his bank account closed was because he was a politically exposed person, which is originating from the EU, a type of person who has been involved in political corruption of some sort, or maybe has got direct links with Russian oligarchs or something like that. And due to this gives banks reason enough to close down their account. And if you have a 40-page document about a high-profile political figure like Farage, then perhaps, yes, this is exactly what it is all about.
Let me give you just a few pointers as to what's in this document. Word searches are really interesting. Brexit is mentioned 30 times. Well, I think it's quite very easy to understand that. I don't think the globalist establishment, I don't think the corporates ever forgave anybody directly involved in the Brexit movement. They didn't accept the result of the referendum, and I guess they never ever will. Russia is mentioned 22 times, with links to a whole series of articles that appeared in The Guardian and elsewhere, attempting to link myself and Arron Banks to Russia, and indeed to Russian funding. All of that has been disproved, with Arron Banks winning his court case, his libel action against Carol Cadwalladr, the journalist involved, who wrote these things.
I don't know if Nigel Farage has a script in front of him, or if someone else wrote it for him, or if he's just a bit of a technophobe, but I have a copy of the dossier, and Brexit actually appears 86 times, and Russia appears 144 times. So he's actually understating quite broadly just how much these things are mentioned. But I think he is completely right to say that the multinational corporations will never forgive Brexit, because it was a complete rejection of globalism, of multinationalism, and it was an attempt to assert that we do not want to carry on with a superstate project. And of course, when it comes to Russia, well, if anything bad ever goes wrong, Russia's just the trump card that they always pull out, and Farage is correct. If you are accusing him of links to Russia, then it is risky business, because we have precedent to say if you are linked to Russia, that can be treated as libel, and you will likely win.
But that's fine. All these people do is take every negative press article about me they possibly can and collate it in this document. Twice in this document, Sir Chris Bryant is mentioned. I hinted a couple of weeks ago I thought this could be behind it, and sure enough, twice the accusation made under parliamentary privilege that I'd received over £500,000 in 1 year from the Kremlin is mentioned in this document and constitutes quite a big part of their conclusions.
So as said last week, Chris Bryant being under parliamentary privilege means that he can't actually be done for libel in this case, but he really should be done under the Parliamentary Privileges Committee, the same committee that has done Boris Johnson for having some cake with people he worked with while in lockdown, and then telling Parliament, as far as he was aware, that was all within COVID rules. Anyway, that's for another video. Point being, there is very good grounds to put in a complaint to the Parliament Privileges Committee, which, at the time of this, by the way, Chris Bryant was chair of.
Donald Trump, well, of course, he gets a mention 14 times.
39, actually.
Donald Trump is mentioned. The fact that I support Donald Trump is, again, part of this charge sheet. Racist is mentioned 9 times, well, I thought it might be. And politically exposed person 5 times. Let me just give you 1 or 2 quotes from this that might be instructive. The client's financial position is now sufficient to retain on a commercial basis. The decision to close me down was made at a meeting on November the 17th last year on the Wealth Reputational Risk Committee. They got together and decided that once the small mortgage I had with them expired in 2023, they would get rid of me, even though I met the financial criteria on a commercial basis, contrary to what was spun to the BBC. They haven't told the truth on this, and I'm pretty blooming angry about it.
Yes, and that is also potentially illegal. The bank foreclosing his accounts because he is a person they don't like, apparently that is actually perfectly legal, even though Coutts is 40% owned, well, it's fully owned by NatWest Group, which is 40% owned by the public after the 2008 bailout. So despite all that, them closing his account for, even if it was no reason, is perfectly legal, but the fact they have lied about why they've closed his account, that could potentially go to court, and I am hoping it does, because actions like this deserve massive consequences.
But now we get into what this report's really all about. While it is accepted that no criminal convictions have resulted, gosh, they sound disappointed, don't they? Commentary and behaviours that do not align with the bank's purpose and values have been demonstrated. So the bank has a series of values. The bank has a series of political positions. And as for purpose, well, I thought the purpose of companies was to act ethically, yes, of course, but to return to their shareholders dividends. And in this case, folks, do you know who the shareholders are? It's you and me. This bank is part of the RBS group. It's 38.6% owned by us because we bailed them out in 2008 after their greed and short-sighted stupidity. We are the shareholders, but they're more bothered about putting up rainbow flags and being popular at dinner parties in Chelsea than they are about actually making money.
I mean, that is just an excellent line and does just summarise the absolute state that we are in as a country. Our metropolitan elite, as he says, or the new elite, are, yes, all more bothered about how they look at dinner parties and how they look to the right-on type people, the left-wing types that you see all over London, than they do to either the rest of the country or to, in this case, as they have plainly put it, their political enemies. Because the fact of the matter is that most of the people that Farage and I have just described, they would probably be very happy to see Farage dead. Not just humiliated and poor, but literally dead. Well, we can tell that most of the time because whenever anyone brings up the plane crash Farage was in, they all laugh and say, oh, it's a shame he didn't die in that, isn't it?
When considering our stance, this is the bank's stance, specifically on ESG, diversity and inclusion, the comments and articles are not in line with our views or our purpose. That word purpose coming back again. I go on. He is seen as xenophobic and racist. Oh, charming. That's nice, isn't it? That really is lovely. Thank you so very much indeed for that. And here's the final one. In making the decision, risk factors, including accusations of links to Russia and controversial public statements which are felt to conflict with the bank's purpose. So let's be clear. The decision to get rid of me wasn't financial. It was done because somehow I don't fit with their values. They were bailed out by us. They have a duty to run at a profit as a commercial business. But no, they are to be the moral guardians of all. And that's because the march through the public and private corporate sectors of left-wing institutions who want to change the way the world is, organizations like Stonewall, has led us exactly to where we are.
That's true, and it's not just Stonewall, by the way. We'll go through the highlights of the dossier in a few moments, but I hope not hate was cited in this. There's plenty of Guardian articles, as he mentioned, and there's even quotes from multitudes of leftists who, well, frankly, hate Britain, and yet are always ending up on panel shows on the BBC and writing for the Guardian. My main example being Dr. Shola Moss Shogbamimu, who is mostly known for seeing absolutely any political issue ever and somehow turning it into racism against black people. So it appears that leftist activists do have their tongues firmly in multinational banks and have managed to, as we can see here, get Nigel Farage debanked, and we'll go through exact details of that in a few moments, as I say. But I'll let Farage finish off.
And I guess it's not just Coutts, because I've been refused by 10 other banks. I will not get a UK bank account. That is done, dusted, over. Mercifully, in the modern world, there are fintech solutions where I can receive and pay money. I won't be able to earn interest on that money. I won't be able to borrow money. It won't be a full bank account, but I will be able to exist and survive. So is this all about me? No. Since I broke this story, the number of people who've been in touch with me, who've been summarily closed down by the banks, because see, the banks don't have to give any explanation. There's something called the tipping off rule, which means they don't have to tell you, for example, if the police are investigating your affairs. I'm not sure they've ever been challenged fully, publicly, over closure of bank accounts the way that I've done. The number of people running little businesses, window cleaners, taking cash. No, we don't want your business anymore as we move towards a cashless control society. Worst of all is this. Above our banks are a series of international agencies, the biggest of them being a firm being called Refinitiv. Okay. Banks go to that firm to see what our creditworthiness is, whether we are an acceptable risk to lend money to, for example. Now, I don't blame the banks for protecting themselves, but Refinitiv are now going to work with banks so they'll be able to check your social media posts. What has happened to me can very soon happen to you. And if it does, we start to move towards a China-style social credit system where our freedoms are gone, our liberty is gone, our ability to exist as ordinary human beings is gone, unless we obey the accepted wisdom of the day.
And these are completely reasonable things to be worried about. We've already seen it happen multiple times, as we went through last week. There was a vicar who lost his Yorkshire Building Society account because he made a complaint saying, "Why are you pushing all this pride stuff? You are a building society. You are not there to push politics and talk about whether it is okay or not for people to have their bits chopped off." We had Laura Towler, who still doesn't understand why her Santander bank got closed without her having any warning or even knowing until she tried to pay for some things. Tommy Robinson, he's had his bank account closed. There's many examples out there. Loads have happened. Yet no one really cares until it happens to someone massive. And Nigel Farage is that someone. They have poked a bear here. And you would hope that there would be some massive repercussions, especially for a banking group that is owned just under 40% by the public. Because by this standard, about half the public should not have bank accounts.
This is completely against free speech, completely against liberty, completely against democracy. And whilst I am absolutely fuming, at least with this document, I have got the truth. That is what is happening in modern Britain. We need radical change to legislation. We've got to change the PEP status rules. Otherwise, high-profile figures, people who could contribute to Parliament, won't go into politics if their children and their parents are at threat of having their bank account closed. We need a completely different attitude towards businesses that take cash. They're not all crooks. If you're running a market stall selling fish, you are going to take cash. And we need the right for everybody in this country, the right for everybody in this country to have a bank account and their own business account. I've given you a snapshot of all of this. You're going to get a lot more this evening. The Daily Telegraph have had full access to all of this. I'll be saying a lot more on my GB News show at 7 o'clock tonight.
And if you wish to watch that, it's easily findable on YouTube, but I will put a little link in the description as usual. But for now, I think it's time we look into the actual dossier and look at some of the absolutely mad details. It's 40 pages long. I could go on about this for probably 2 or 3 hours, but I will just pick out some highlights that I noticed. And first up is the summary, and Farage isn't wrong when he says it is a Stasi-style accusation document. Seeking approval to continue the relationship with Nigel Farage, subject to annual reviews, refer to Nigel Farage's controversial profile in public life and politics, reflected in the adverse press outlined in the paper presented. Despite the adverse press, from a legal perspective, Nigel Farage has not been formally charged of any wrongdoing and is not subject to any regulatory censure. And that should have been enough there and then. That should have just been like, oh, okay, throw it out then. In terms of any potential connections to Russia, Nigel Farage has not been sanctioned and had no known direct or indirect Russian connections. Nigel Farage is already a Coutts customer, which he had made public knowledge. Recommendation is to retain Nigel Farage for now. However, it was noted that Nigel Farage currently has a mortgage with Coutts, which is due to expire in July 2023, in which, on a commercial basis, we would not look to renew and would suggest winding down the connection on that basis. So, the cheeky bankers, and I really wish I could use another word there, have basically said, we're not going to warn him of any of this. We're just going to let him pay off all the money he owes us, and then we're going to cut him loose, just not having part of the bank anymore, despite the fact they've just admitted, well, we've actually got no reason to do that. Already in the summary, they haven't actually given a reason to let go of him. It's been a foregone conclusion. They wanted to do this. And in this internal document, they're trying to find all the reasons to, and clearly they couldn't find any. Or at least find any legitimate ones. Of course, the reason they did get rid of him is because, as Nigel Farage and, well, let's face it, everyone apart from desperate leftists knew, it was because he is not a globalist. He is a firm nationalist. The paper was right to mention the Russian allegations and potential Russian connections Nigel Farage had, but there was nothing substantive in that regard. In other words, they looked at all the Russian allegations and couldn't find anything that holds water. This, by the way, points to the fact that Nigel Farage does not have connections with Russia, because banks are very good at finding this stuff. There were reputational risks to consider of banking Nigel Farage, given that he is such a high-profile figure and has been the subject of significant adverse press. We needed to be in a position to convene and react quickly if Nigel Farage made public comments that created increased reputational risk of Coutts continuing to bank with him. 6 months before the expiry of Nigel Farage's mortgage with Coutts, they would indicate to Nigel Farage that we are not renewing the mortgage, but were such a flashpoint to arise before then in relation to Nigel Farage, which we are uncomfortable with, third-party personal data removed, would escalate quickly to this committee, exiting Nigel Farage next year on commercial grounds when the mortgage rolls off. I love it. I love it. Oh, Nigel Farage might have reputational risk because apparently Nigel Farage has made it public he banks with Coutts. Well, that's Farage's fault, obviously. Though I don't know why that news never came out until Coutts got in contact with the BBC, so I have no idea where Nigel Farage made it public, but perhaps we'll get into it. But despite finding absolutely nothing illegal or dodgy about what Nigel Farage is doing, they've said let him go anyway because of our quote-unquote reputation. Well, you did let go of him. How's your reputation now, Coutts? Third-party data removed, commented that there is an extra cost attached to managing the accounts of high-profile individuals such as Nigel Farage. The committee did not think continuing to bank with Nigel Farage was compatible with Coutts, given his publicly stated views that were odds with our position as an inclusive organisation. So inclusive, they kick people out. This was not a political decision, but one centred around inclusivity and purpose. Purpose with a capital P, which is quite sickening, to be honest, but these people need to realise, the general public need to realise, whenever there's anything to do with equality, diversity, inclusion, that is explicitly political. and also evil. So this is a directly evil political move by the bank. With support of the committee, the chair concludes as follows. After the expiry of the mortgage with Coutts, Nigel Farage would not be a criteria client, and we should set a glide path to exiting Nigel Farage when the mortgage expires. However, whilst the mortgage is in place, we should continue to monitor Nigel Farage, and if there is a flashpoint involving Nigel Farage which would increase the reputational risk to the bank, it should be escalated to the committee promptly. Therefore, the decision was to exit Nigel Farage, including business accounts, that exit to be on a glide path to coincide with the expiry of the mortgage, but an earlier exit to be considered if an event occurs that amplifies the reputational risks associated with banking Nigel Farage. Third-party personal data removed team would undertake monthly adverse press checks on Nigel Farage. It would also agreed that third-party personal data removed and group reputational risks committee should be made aware of the decision to exit Nigel Farage to ensure that they do not have any concerns with this. And apparently they didn't, because it has gone through and it has happened. So it's all there in black and white writing. I want to get this point through as much as possible. Nigel Farage has literally done nothing wrong, nothing illegal, nothing immoral at all. All the bank has done is said, we have these positions and purpose. You do not agree with this. You have publicly stated you do not agree with this. Therefore, you can't bank with us anymore. We have multinational banks, and this isn't the only one, that are political activists. And worst of all, they are pushing what is essentially student politics. We, not even just as a country anymore, we as an entire civilization, multinational civilizations, are going directly down the toilet. There is absolutely no defence of this at all. No defence whatsoever. And yet, as we saw last week, even though it was before all this came out, people were still trying to defend Nigel Farage being kicked out, even on political grounds. It's crazy. Further in the document, key risks are documented. These include reputational risks. So Nigel Farage is high profile and actively courts controversy. This leads to more profile and maintains his presence in the spotlight. He has operated like this throughout his political and media careers. He probably does that because it works, and it managed to get the biggest political upset we have seen in probably centuries. Financial crime risk. Principally, this arises because of the alleged Russian connection, and as we saw in the summary, there is absolutely nothing in that holds water, so there is no financial crime risk. And finally, reputational risk if we exit. It is very likely that the client will go public if we exited him. And well, that has happened, hasn't it? So the cost-benefit analysis essentially went, is Nigel Farage, being a high-profile political figure who is against basically everything this bank is in favour of, worth the reputational risk of us, well, being seen as pure evil if we do get rid of him for his political beliefs? And they decided, yeah, why not do that? And it doesn't appear to have worked out in their favour, though of course only time will tell. We have considered whether there are further risks, for example tax-motivated transactions, high-risk trading activities, and ESE. ESE being environmental, social and ethical risks. These do not appear relevant here and have been discounted. So Nigel Farage isn't doing anything ethically evil, socially evil, or environmentally evil. Good to know. Team uncovered adverse press. This includes various reports that claimed Nigel Farage incited race hate when he compared the Black Lives Matter movement to the Taliban and Islamic extremists in relation to toppling of the Colston statue in Bristol. This was presented to PB Farage in January 2022, and it was agreed that the client should be referred to RRC. That is the Reputational Risk Committee. The client was again referred to PB Farage in April 2022 due to adverse press in relation to allegations from Labour MP, third-party personal data removed, that he received over £500,000 from Russia Today in 2018. Well, we know that that's Chris Bryant. I don't know why they've redacted that. It was again decided at PB Triage that this case should be referred to RRC, noting the re-emergence of the allegations of Russian ties. There is a lot of adverse press relating to Nigel Farage. This list is not exhaustive. For example, it does not capture most of Nigel Farage's Twitter feed, which is extensive. But I love it. I love how most of all of these are just allegations from other people about Nigel Farage. Nothing really about what he's actually done. A great example is the first thing in the racism, xenophobia, BLM and anti-Semitism here, which It's just a ridiculous list of accusations, if you ask me. So on 20 October 2022, The Guardian, Jewish groups criticised Nigel Farage for calling Grant Shapps globalist. Jewish groups and campaigners have condemned commentators and media, including Nigel Farage and GB News, for calling Grant Shapps a globalist, a term which has associations with anti-Semitism and the far right. So apparently saying accurately that some people hold certain political positions that aren't nationalist and are in fact internationalist is anti-Semitic. After Shapps, who is Jewish, was appointed in place of Suella Braverman, a series of right-wing commentators and politicians used Twitter to paint his elevation as part of a plot in which anti-Brexit globalists were taking over Liz Truss's government. Well, we had confirmation a few weeks later that that's basically what's happening, given that she was overthrown and replaced with Sunak, whose only remotely nationalist criteria is that he wants to stop illegal immigrants coming across the channel. It's hardly a high bar. But this is the first thing that they reference that Farage is an anti-Semite racist or whatever. It's just the fact that some Jewish groups have said that he might be anti-Semitic or pushing anti-Semitic language because he's accurately described someone's political positions. But the final paragraph of this part says this: the former UKIP leader repeatedly aired such views in interviews with Alex Jones, the far-right US radio host and conspiracy theorist, who has recently been ordered to pay vast damages for claiming the Sandy Hook US shooting was faked. They have to reach so hard that they have to invoke people have interviewed Nigel Farage, people who have had to pay for their crimes of libel. Yes, I don't think you'd see anything like that written about someone like Carol Cadwallader, who is having to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to Aaron Banks for lying about him. It all goes one way because there are conspiracy theorists on all sides of the political spectrum. It's just the left-wing ones are the only acceptable ones. To the point where you apparently get kicked out of a bank if you point out that there are left-wing conspiracy theories. Amazingly, the second example isn't that much better. 22 September 2022, Eastern Eye commented on a recent tweet by Nigel Farage in an article titled "Lawmakers who promoted multicultural and diversity are responsible for Leicester violence." Their examples are literally just other people have commented on Nigel Farage, and what Farage says isn't even bad. Farage said that Leicester violence was a result of the immigration crisis, given that pretty much all the violence was done by immigrants. I think that's fair to say. Virtually every single MP in Westminster is responsible for the ethnic and religious violence seen in Leicester, Farage wrote on Twitter on Wednesday. They decided to go down the road of diversity and multiculturalism. Our politicians have done this to our great country, he tweeted. That gets him... That is under reasons to kick him out of the bank, apparently. And since they've openly said that it goes against their purpose, clearly their purpose is one of diversity and multiculturalism, something that the British public are constantly trying to reject, and yet is a message that seems to never actually make a dent into Westminster. And this continues into the last example I'll go through. Earlier articles from 9 June 2020 on the Mail Online and in the Metro highlighted the following key comments from Nigel Farage in relation to BLM toppling the Colston statue. When told by Dr. Shoz Shog Bamimu that BLM represents a fight against racism in this country and that Nigel Farage was inciting evil racism, Nigel Farage refused to back down. Why would it? Just because someone with doctor in the name says something doesn't mean it's right. Moz Shag Bamimu is a complete moron who does nothing but grift for money by talking about racism even where it doesn't exist. Nigel Farage said the Taliban love to blow up and destroy historical monuments from a different time that they do not approve of. Yeah, nothing wrong with saying that. That's true. BLM do the same thing. Fine. Mr. Farage has previously tweeted, a new form of the Taliban was born in the UK today. Unless we got moral leadership quickly, our cities won't be worth living in. When Piers Morgan told him slave trader Colston was responsible for the deaths of 20,000 people, Farage described him as a big philanthropist. I've got plenty of videos on the Colston thing. He was involved in the slave trade in as far as he had shares in a company that was involved in slave trading. As, you know, being involved in anything to do with the Atlantic trade would involve slave trading. To make him out that he directly killed 20,000 people is just disingenuous. To make out that he was involved in being a huge philanthropist in Bristol is not, however, given that half the city is named after him because most of the city was built on his philanthropy. So next up comes the Russian allegations, although not so much Russian allegations, just the fact that he's not as critical as Putin and Russia as the bank would like him to be. In 25 February 2022, the indie All the Times that Nigel Farage has praised Putin have resurfaced. A damning video of all the times Nigel Farage has praised Vladimir Putin is going viral on Twitter. Farage has been a vocal supporter of the Russian leader who has waged war on Ukraine and is launching an attack from land, sea and air. Right-wing former politician Farage has previously said Putin was the world leader he most admired as an operator. I would love to know the time period when he said that, because I doubt he said that after 2022. Now, all the times Farage has praised the warmongering leader has been stitched together in a video that was shared on social media by Adam Bienkov, the political editor and correspondent for the Byline Times. They're referencing the Byline Times. That's the Otto English paper. Incredible. Bienkov wrote, Nigel Farage has spent years praising Putin and blaming Europeans for attempting to defend themselves against him. No surprise he's still at it today. In one clip, Farage said, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts. Another clip showed Farage being challenged by David Dimbleby about when he said Putin was the leader he most admired. Farage also blamed the EU and the expansionist of NATO for allegedly starting some of the violence, calling the expansion provocative and claiming it was encircling Russia. Now, I don't agree with a lot of Farage's views there, but that doesn't mean that I think that he should have his bank account removed. However, the banking experts think that he should, and therefore that is what's happened. Of course, there's also the part where Chris Bryant said that he took $500,000 from Russia today, and amazingly they go through the same Spectator article that I brought up last week. So I don't know why they've put this in the section of here is where he has been pro-Russia. They even admit at the bottom that there is absolutely no other evidence to say that what Chris Bryant was saying is true. In other words, it has turned out that he has just lied. He needs to be kicked off as an MP. You can't get away with saying things like that. It's insane. I think this climate denying part and the other part of these lists of things why Nigel Farage is bad have to be some of the funniest, though. So for the quote-unquote climate denial part, 13 March 2022 from The Guardian, Nigel Farage campaigning for a referendum on the government's net zero policy to decarbonise the economy by 2050. In other words, he's against net zero by 2050, as everyone who's sensible is. Nigel Farage's hard-right faction won Brexit. Now net zero is in its sights. First it was Brexit, followed by a spurt of very successful campaigning to ensure that Britain left the EU on the most stringent and self-harming terms. Thanks, Guardian. Actually, hang on. Is this an opinion piece? Oh my god, it is. It is. They are taking Guardian opinion pieces as fact, as evidence that Nigel Farage should not have a bank account anymore. I feel so vindicated for doing Laughing at the Guardian for so long. These articles are the worst thing I think you can read on the internet. This is full on embarrassing. Coutts are using Guardian opinion pieces as part of their evidence to kick him off. In fact, it is the only one they are using to say that Nigel Farage is against net zero, which, yeah, sure he is, but my god, you need to use something a little bit, just a tiny bit more reputable than Guardian opinion pieces. This is unbelievable. Guardian opinion pieces just frankly should not exist. They are basically subsidised by the BBC, which buy half of the Guardian's print. And that is basically the only thing keeping them in business. This is unbelievable. I mean, just from that point on, can't be bothered reading the rest of that bit because I know it's nonsense. So moving on to other, there are also other adverse press relating to Nigel Farage which does not fall into the first three categories outlined. For examples of this include Nigel Farage advocating for the government to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, of course he does. It's mental. Endorsement of Donald Trump, including defending Trump's grab them by the pussy remarks as locker room banter and stating that Trump was not running to be Pope. In 2020, when asked about women's football, Nigel Farage gave the following answer. Here, the balloon goes up with fixed bayonets. When the whistles are about to blow and go over the top, do we actually want there to be women beside us? Do we? What an extraordinary, bizarre idea. I certainly don't think so, but maybe it's because I've got so many women pregnant over the years, I have a different view. I find it very difficult to think that we could stand up and run over the top together, into machine gun or whatever. Men and women are different, thank God. I need a source for that. Why would he start going on about World War One when asked about women's football? In fact, later on it does find a source, and it's from Hope Not Hate. So, again, leftists, leftist activists pushing and pushing and pushing these type of things. And well, what's their source on it? Because on their website, all they have is yet another quote that says, "When asked about women's football, Farage gave the reply." In turn, they actually got it from a Huffington Post article, who once again give out the exact same wording and quote there. And they actually go on to say the interview conducted with Belgium magazine Upfront in 2010 was uncovered on Wednesday by Political Scrapbook. Now there's a link there. It doesn't actually go anywhere. It goes to a connection timed out page. So I couldn't actually indulge in this source any further because I can't find the magazine Upfront on Google, and I certainly can't find the interview. So I think what has happened here is that the Belgian magazine, because I don't actually doubt it exists and that this interview happened, but I think what has really happened is they have just made it out that when asked about women's football, he said this. I think what's more than likely happened is he has been asked, what do you think of women being involved in typically male spaces, such as in football or in war? Because I don't know why he would bring up World War One unless it was something like war was initially brought up or being on the front lines. So I think that unfortunately there has not been enough due diligence here, and once again Coutts is just taking leftist word for gold. Really, they're just trusting them at their word, and as I am hopefully demonstrating in this video alone, their word is not to be trusted. And to finish off, and then, of course, there's the appearances on InfoWars, and they go on about Alex Jones and Sandy Hook again. Great. Good work, Coutts. You've done really good to investigate him there. That is embarrassing. So, after points expanding on the risks that Nigel Farage brings, as we saw in the summary, there were basically none, this is what the expanded recommendation and rationale is. So, here is that while Nigel Farage's view do not align with our values, his engagement with us is in line with what we expect. Professional, polite and respectful. The economic contribution, though, is low. Accordingly, we are recommending that the approval be given to continue the relationship subject to annual review. To which it then goes straight into alignment on purpose, the bank purpose. There are several factors and behaviours demonstrated by Nigel Farage which arguably do not align with values that serve the common good and that treat people with dignity and respect. Of course, secretly saying that you are going to close Nigel Farage's account after he's given you all the money he owes is treating people with dignity and respect, after he has treated you professionally, polite and respectfully. Unbelievable. When viewed from our perspective, however, we are considering an individual, and to some extent that does include expecting not all views to be the same as ours. However, when considering our stance specifically on ESG and diversity and inclusion, so ESG supporting diversity and inclusion, black, Asian, minority and ethnic equality, LGBTQ rights and social mobility. The comments and articles are not in line with our views or our purpose, and they expand once again on the examples before that they gave. And as I have showed you, especially the climate change one, it is just other people accusing him of being a racist, anti-Semite, climate denier, whatever. Not really going into actually what he believes and what he says. Now, I'm not saying in every case they are lying about him. He is against net zero 2050 plan put in by the Tory government. He does appear to be more pro-Russia than, well, especially the bank. He's not racist or xenophobic, though. I mean, he's got a German wife, for God's sake. But I am saying that if you are a type of person that will have these labels thrown at you, you're at the same risk of Nigel Farage here, because they're not really going into detail about what Nigel Farage has said. They're going into detail about what other people have said about Farage. And, you know, to give them some credit, they did go through the Chris Bryant accusations and not find anything, but they still put it in regardless as evidence that he took money from the Russian state. And that is evil. And this dossier just gets worse and worse and worse, by the way. Here's another absolutely insane highlight. So apparently the financial crime customer risk assessment rating is high. Don't know why that is. They don't expand on it, but I can only imagine it's because of the accusations from Chris Bryant. And then slightly further down, is the customer or beneficial owner significant controller of a politically exposed person, public official, politically exposed person, relative, close associate, or a special interest client group? The answer to that is yes. Currently a lower risk one, however. The AML team, which is the anti-money laundering team, will be looking to declassify him as a PEP on the next review, as he is no longer associated with any political party, and the party he has been associated with no longer hold any representation any longer. Now, the reason I point this out is because I reckon that Coutts realised that if they're going to get him out, they're going to have to get him out while he is still a PEP, and hopefully use that as a kind of shield. I know they haven't at the moment because they probably realised it was a weak shield, but as we will go into, they did seem to be trying to rush this. And in fact, seem to be rushing it quicker than they wanted to. However, before we finish off with that, they go into a nature of relationship to the bank and commercial considerations. The below article indicates that the client's relationship with Coutts is public or common knowledge, and they link to a Times article. And the thing with this article is that Nigel Farage didn't actually disclose that he had accounts with Coutts. It was actually done by investigative journalism by the Times. He is the man of the people, often photographed holding a pint in a pub and smiling broadly, but Nigel Farage banks with Coutts, the 327-year-old private bank, whose customers include the Queen, and has his mortgage there, according to the title deeds, to his home in West Ham, Kent. The bank has strict lending criteria that would enable only the wealthiest of clients to afford one of its mortgage products. Those wishing to take out a mortgage with Coutts must either have an annual income of at least £500,000 or a combination of savings, investment and loans with it, which can include the mortgage, of at least £1 million. Farage has frequently bemoaned the lack of money in politics, and in a 2017 interview he claimed to be skint, but publicly available Companies House records, seen by the Sunday Times, suggest the picture may have changed. A company called Thorn in the Side, of which Farage is the sole director, has assets of just over £500,000 for the year to May 2018. So this is the thing, Farage never openly said that he has an account with Coutts. It was reported by the Times after they did investigative journalism. They found it through his title deeds to his home in West Ham. It's crazy. So at the start of the dossier, when it said Nigel Farage made it publicly known that he has a bank with that he banks with Coutts, he never actually did. The Times just did it by doing their investigative journalism. So the dossier is just lying about Farage making it public. He never did, and in fact when this story came out, he kept the bank's name hidden, presumably out of respect for the bank. But then Coutts went to the BBC, lied to the BBC, and now this dossier has come out, and now they look like complete fools. So the final thing I want to go through before closing out this video, because the rest of this dossier is just expanding on things that I have already summarised, and of course there is just pages of data extracted about Nigel Farage, the things that he said, but let's be fair, it's actually mostly things that other people have said about him. But the final thing I want to go through is this final page before the glossary. The personal data extracted from internal email exchange regarding Nigel Farage wealth exit decision. So as we can see, on the 13th of March 2023, it has been noted and okay to proceed according to the previously approved exit plan, in that they are going to wait for him to pay off his mortgage and then kick him out of the bank. And then a few days earlier, this turns out to be in reply to this: I wanted to make you aware of a commercial exit decision we have made on the account of Nigel Farage. The relationship has been below commercial criteria for some time, and upon review of Nigel's past public profile and connections, the perceived risks of the future weighed against the benefit of retention. The decision was taken to exit upon repayment of an existing mortgage. In making the decision, risk factor including accusations and links to Russia, controversial public statements which were felt to conflict with the bank's purpose and possibility, the speculated upon in the press and are not denied, of re-entry into politics were taken into account. There is, however, also clearly a risk of negative publicity in exiting, which was accepted. The exit was expected to be in Q3 of 2023, however, the mortgage has now been paid early and the security released, which is triggering an early notification of exit to the client. In other words, what happened at Coutts is that they did have this exit plan, but they were waiting and thought that this would all be done in Q3 of 2023, in other words, in a few months' time. But instead, Nigel Farage has clearly paid off his mortgage early, and because he's done that, they automated the system to kick him out. And so they've realised, oh, the securities have been triggered, and now we're getting notifications that he's going to be exiting. And so what I think happened is that they started panicking a bit and just went, right, just go ahead with the plan. We'll take whatever PR hits we can take then. So they went ahead with the risks because Nigel Farage paid his mortgage off early, which they obviously weren't expecting. So actually everything we are seeing at this point, even though it's a few months after March, is actually part of that panic exit. They probably will have had a better plan for this, because someone like Nigel Farage getting kicked out of a bank, that's obviously going to be huge news. But they obviously simply weren't prepared for it. Hence it appears that that is the reason they lied to the BBC and have been deathly silent about this whole situation. So that's the entirety of the dossier. All I can say about it is that it is one of the most chilling dossiers I think I've ever read. People ask me, why do I care about The Guardian? Why do I care about all these mentalists absolutely trying to demolish Britain as a culture, a civilization, and all its history? Why do I care about these right-wing politicians that don't even know me or care about me? Well, the reason is because I am under this threat too. This is putting me off going publicly into politics, because if this all comes out, if any of this comes out and I'm in public office and they have this whole YouTube channel to go through where I don't swear as much anymore, but my God, some of the things I have said on live streams and things like that, yeah, no doubt I'm going to get called all these names. And it doesn't really matter what I said. It doesn't matter what the context is. The fact of the matter is that if I ever go public and The Guardian and all their little minions try and find something to get offended at in my 3 years on this platform, 3 years? I've been on this platform nearly 6. I could lose my entire life. And not only that, by the way, according to The Telegraph, members of Farage's family have also been refused accounts by other banks, and one family member was told their account was being closed. So if it was just me, I probably wouldn't mind. I'd find a way through. I can't do that to my family. I can't at all. And this is happening right as we speak to Farage's family. This is a blatant political attack. This is saying either agree with us on equality, on climate change, on any other of the right-on issues, and that is the only way that you are allowed to live in a civilized country. When really it should all be down to your actions. What actions do you partake in? And if you do any of them criminally, well, we've got a justice system to decide whether they can be in society or not. When it comes to opinions, when it comes to politics, it should be all open to debate. And yet Coutts doesn't agree, and unfortunately most of the new elites don't agree, and unfortunately the new elite are perfectly happy with all this, because a lot of leftists have gone from, oh, this isn't happening, Farage is a liar, to, good, I'm glad, he is a scumbag. And I'm afraid you cannot live in a country that abides by those rules. You cannot live under corporations that abide by that type of thinking. So luckily quite a lot of Tory MPs have come out in support of Farage, but unfortunately a lot of them are talking as if they're in the opposition at the moment, when really they have the power to do something about this, so let's hope they actually realise that and do something about it. Anyway though, that's everything I had for you today. So, once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.